Okay, well, thanks very much for the invite, and I will give a slightly different sort of take on AI, less practical, a bit more philosophical, and I will try to explore some of the sort of more difficult aspects, I would say, about AI, some of the more negative aspects. And like previous technologies, artificial intelligence is really a double-edged sword. On the one hand, enabling greater control, but also at the same time changing our ecosystem, bringing about changes in habit and organization, which for some people at least may well lead to an element of dependency and also a lack of control. Like previous technologies, artificial intelligence enables greater speed, it extends our capabilities, it enables greater efficiency and profit. But there is a fundamental difference, because previous technological revolutions copied and extended to a large extent our bodily movements, whereas artificial intelligence is about copying and extending our mental and cognitive capabilities. And this makes for a fundamental difference. And this makes the era of artificial intelligence qualitatively different, with substantial consequences for what it is to be a human being. So I would argue that artificial intelligence has the potential to transform a number of key features of what it is to be a human being. And we can call them agency, cognition, truth, creativity, and collaboration. And all five characteristics are intimately connected to what it is to be a human being. Agency refers to our ability to intervene in the world and to exercise an element of autonomy and self-control. Cognition refers to our ability to think, to solve puzzles, and to reflect on what we are trying to achieve. Truth refers to our ability to distinguish between fact and fiction. Creativity refers to our ability to create something unique and authentic. And finally, cooperation ties in with the social nature of what it is to be a human being, the extent to which we rely on and embark upon collaboration with others in order to achieve what we want to achieve. So artificial intelligence, I would argue, has the potential to transform all five features of what it is to be a human being, and in some cases undermine some of those features. And I will, because of lack of time, I will focus on the first three: agency, cognition, and truth. Agency. This, remember, is about our ability to intervene in the world, to exercise an element of autonomy and self-control. And I think this is going to be altered substantially, and for some people, to a large extent, reduced. AI-generated surveillance is already pretty omnipresent. Think of digital terrorism. We no longer need an army of managers to check up on workers and ensure that they meet specific targets. The technology does it far more effectively for us and implements a continuous set of incentives and sanctions so that the workforce remains on track and works in an optimal fashion through an element of self-monitoring. In many countries, as you know, people's mobile phones are now part of an elaborate digital monitoring system, tracing where people are, to whom they are connected, what they purchase, and so on. Secondly, manipulation. Artificial intelligence has now the ability to, for sophisticated forms of manipulation, with individualized messages, nudging people in ways that are uniquely suited to them. People in that context often talk about digital capitalism or platform capitalism as a system based around individualized advertising, relying on large data provided by the users themselves. But the case of Cambridge Analytica has shown how the very same logic can be used way beyond advertising, to nudge people to do things, to vote in a particular way, or to think very differently. Thirdly, we are sometimes complicit in our own declining agency. Artificial intelligence makes so many things much easier. It's, as we heard this morning in one of the workshops, it's like having a personal assistant 24/7. If you want to go to Florence for the weekend, you can get a whole travel plan suited to your needs. So if somebody asks you for a talk about AI, 15 minutes talk, I could have relied on AI to provide it for me with PowerPoint and the odd joke in the mix. So we can relax and obtain a level of cognitive comfort analogous to the physical comfort provided by other technologies. But it also means that we give away control, and in the long run possibly lose the skills to do all these things by ourselves. And then finally, of course, there's the big anxiety, which is about how AI might eventually bypass the control of those who design it. And this is a considerable concern on the part of the main people in the industry, and even led some of them to argue for a moratorium. What about cognition? The ability to think, to solve puzzles, and reflect upon the state of play. And I think this is where AI in particular is going to make a massive difference, because it's about copying and extending precisely this human capability. And again, this will be altered and reduced for some. People now, the catchword is cognitive offloading. We see a significant amount of cognitive offloading where individuals decide to use AI to do their cognitive work, whether it's a student submitting an essay or a business person using AI for PowerPoint to do their pitch, or whether it's somebody who's applying for a job and using an AI-generated covering letter and CV that's probably going to be assessed by people who use AI on the other hand. And just as with previous technological revolutions, the competitive and accelerated nature of our society, what Rosa calls the acceleration society, makes it more difficult for us to operate without the use of AI, because we have to go fast and we have to do things now. A lot of research has now shown the rapid and far-fetching effects of this use on the human brain. The loss of creative and puzzle-solving skills, which have considerable effects in the long run. It's good to make a comparison here with previous technological revolutions, such as, say, the car or the crane, which copied and extended bodily movements. And we ended up organizing our lives around them. And in the end, we became dependent on the technologies and then lost really the physical activity in our everyday life. And then we have to make up for it by going to the gym and so on. And so we might be seeing something of a similar kind in relation to this kind of revolution, in that our dependence on the technology might also lead to a new kind of loss, a loss of cognitive skills, at least for some people, because I think there's going to be quite a difference between different social strata. There's a more far-reaching effect in relation to cognition, and I call it the uncoupling of subject and thought. In that it's perfectly possible for some of us that we'll see a break with the Cartesian linking of the subject and thought, where people get so used to AI to think for them that they might, some individuals might lose the ability to think clearly for themselves in relation to important decisions of life. And so they might lose the ability to know what they think and to know how their thoughts are different to the thoughts of others. It's interesting to bring in somebody like Hannah Arendt, a political philosopher, because she argued that totalitarianism, a distinct political system in the 20th century, was really, one of the characteristics, according to her, was that it meant that people lost the ability to think for themselves. They were so wrapped up in following orders from above, or they were so enamored with a political leader, or they were so terrorized because of the ongoing violence, that they lost an inner voice, that they were not able to have a conversation with themselves. And it's on that basis that she described Eichmann in terms of the banality of evil. And other people make similar kind of arguments. For example, Zygmunt Bauman, he puts the blame on large bureaucracies because he says the people who work in bureaucracies, they're trained to think in terms of instrumental rationality. They're not trained to think about what they're actually achieving. And so you can have these extraordinary machineries that are pursuing something highly irrational, but in an incredibly rational fashion. And so for him, bureaucracies tie in with a form of thoughtlessness and a lack of responsibility. And at the time when these people were writing, Hannah Arendt in the 1950s and 60s, and Bauman in this context in the 1980s, 90s, people thought, well, this is a bit overblown. But it's perfectly possible that in the context of AI, the specter of thoughtlessness might loom large again, and that we don't need a distinct political system, or we don't need a particular organization as such to ensure that people stop thinking for themselves. The system in itself, AI, might do it for us. What about truth? The last thing I'm going to talk about. And this is about our ability to ascertain what is factually correct and what is fiction. Nearly half a century ago, this man, Jean Baudrillard, the sociologist from France, argued that in the era of late capitalism, we have basically the prevalence of what he called simulacra. These are copies of the real thing. And so we're surrounded by copies of reality rather than reality as such, for example, advertising, that we find it very difficult, he argues, to distinguish what is real and what is not real. And he calls this hyperreality. And again, at the time, people thought there wasn't much empirical evidence to support these grand claims. But you can see that with AI, some of these things are indeed taking place. We now have a variety of terms that we already use to refer to made-up reality, hallucinations, deepfakes, and we find it very difficult to distinguish between what is fact and what is fiction. So we live in a form of hyperreality in that sense. Internet hopes. Back in the 1980s, the hope was, of course, that the internet would make us more enlightened because we would have more information, all of us would have an input and we would all have access to the information. But it quickly became apparent that the AI-generated algorithms, the way in which they were set up, unintentionally produced a web of reinforcing falsehoods, hence the circulation of conspiracy theories and crackpot theories ranging from whether it's in relation to COVID-19 or the so-called stolen 2020 election or even the flat earth theory. Finally, no, not quite finally, process of knowledge acquisition. With AI, we can now bypass the mechanisms by which we arrive at knowledge claims. So we can bypass the process. We can bypass information gathering and verification. And these are important skills which we're bound to lose gradually. At the same time, most individuals have very little knowledge about how AI operates, how the algorithms work, how it arrives at certain truths, and we have scant knowledge of its biases unless they're very blatant. Finally, circularity. In the long run, AI-generated knowledge might become consolidated and then feed into more AI-generated knowledge, producing a circularity of information and knowledge creation, potentially reinforcing hallucinations. This is not to say that we'll have one orthodoxy. We might get a war of information, of AI truths, or competing AI paradigms. But the general capability of people to verify these truths, let alone their ability to generate their own truths, might well decline over time. I will just finish with just 3 points. All this is related also to creativity and cooperation. Can't go into it. Secondly, inequalities will be very important in this context, because I think that we will see that higher social strata will be more vigilant about some of these issues. And I think we'll see a new form of inequality around some of the issues which I talked about. And then thirdly, I'm just giving you extrapolations based on the current state of play. And obviously AI can go into very different directions. And indeed, we've seen plenty of examples here of tech for good. But I just want to give you the other side of the story. Thank you.